call this meeting to order. We have a quorum, just barely, with 4 of us here. Turning to the consent calendar, has everyone had a chance to take a look at the minutes from last session? Any changes?
I have a number of corrections to the minutes, including the fact that while I think very highly of Commissioner McTighe, I think it's hard for him to make a motion and second it on the commission minutes from March 6th. So I believe I actually was the second on that, but I'm not going to get overly possessive.
We'll give it to you.
There are other comments that I would like to correct as well, if you don't mind my taking the liberty of
Sure.
running. So on 4400 El Camino, my comment, window quality is poor and there's no variation at the ground level. No variation in ground level in the material, the spatial relationship, anything that somehow differentiates the different 20 or 30-foot sections. And then on 5100 El Camino, Commissioner Bresek said the landscape maintenance is suffering. I think the issue was broader, that I think there was a concern as to there was something wrong, and it was unclear whether the soil, there was an issue with the soil, the choice of the variety of shrubbery, the maintenance. There was something that was causing the shrubbery after 5 or 10 years not to look good. So it's not clear what the cause was of that. Mm-hmm. And then on 396 First Street, again, under my comments near the bottom, the project seemed too bulky and design should have reduced its scale to include 2-story elements. Is 2-story elements in a significant way? Just making a little section 2-story is not enough. It needs to break up the mass and bulk in a much larger way. And then on Pine Lane, Commissioner Laurel talked about landscaping on the Spagnoli properties, but my understanding is that, and I agree that it's not a lot of landscaping, but the property owners in Spagnoli didn't want it, so I don't know how we factor that in.
You mean landscaping? Okay. Landscaping to mask the Spagnoli courthouses from the development.
Yes, and the development actually wanted to do it, and the Spagnoli Court residents didn't. So I don't know.
Well,
it's an interesting.
Can't that some version of those words be put in the minutes?
Yeah. Under 343 Second Street, again on my comment, the open space of the corner of property wasn't so open and accessible area was smaller. Smaller than not what was expected, but what was approved. The approval was for it to be an open area available to the community, and for a variety of reasons, Packard Foundation decided to close it off. So those are my specific comments, and maybe there are others.
I don't have any.
Any other objections, comments? No?
I would move to approve the minutes
As amended?
as amended.
I'll second it.
All in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry, David. Sorry, David.
Couldn't jump in there quick enough. While we have that vote resting there. On 243rd Street, there were 2 comments, and my notes know that Tate couldn't differentiate who made those comments.
I believe Phoebe made the comment about the blank wall, but I think Malka may, and a number of us may have seconded that. Malka,
Blank wall
do you-
issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think all of us were talking about it at the, you can give it to anyone.
that was maybe
Sidewalk needs to be
why I
wider than
left
parking
it
plaza.
out on my notes, that I
So I,
really just couldn't attribute it to one commissioner necessarily.
Yeah, but I know that the sidewalk needs to be wider on the parking plaza, was something that Phoebe had brought up.
right.
Um,
And then the blank wall is a general issue.
It was a general
Yeah,
issue. I
that
think
was
everybody-
seemed to be a universal concern.
So noted. Thank you.
Okay, so do we need a new motion and approval, or are we just,
Oh, no, that's fine.
okay, good.
With that, so
Is now the opportunity for public comment before the discussion?
pardon me?
Is now the opportunity for public comment before discussion of the villages?
Yeah, I don't have it on the calendar, but we certainly can make public comment for things not on the agenda.
Is there anyone here for public? No. Okay, so let's move to the discussion of the villages draft EIR.
Staff report, I guess.
Staff reports.
Thank you. We're here tonight to review the environmental impact report for the Villages at San Antonio Center Phase 2 draft EIR. What I've prepared is a report. We've had an opportunity as staff to go through the document and prepare our comments. And our intent is to review those with you, solicit your feedback, and if there's anything to add to these, we welcome that. And the intention is then to review those with the council at their next meeting and get their input if appropriate, and then on the 24th of the month, present a letter of concern to Mountain View. And what I'm going to do is just give a brief summary of the concerns that we've noted, and also just mention that our Transportation Services Manager, Cedric Novinario, is here tonight and answer technical questions about the traffic analysis. And by and large, that's our main issue with the project like this. From our perspective, that's really the only impacts to our community, would be the traffic impacts. So, in summary, we found that their traffic study underestimates the vehicle trips, underestimates the distribution of those trips on San Antonio Road through Los Altos, and has the potential to significantly impact some of our intersections as a result. And so some of our concerns relate to their calculations regarding some of the flexible use area, and we're suggesting they should use the highest trip generation for the particular use range for that commercial area, and that there's a certain midday peak, if you will, to that area of San Antonio and El Camino. And we think that they should factor that in, especially with regard to the pedestrian traffic that affects that intersection level of service. We're also concerned about the Transportation Demand Management Plan. They're taking a 30% credit based on reducing the trips to the office use primarily. And it's not clear what those, what the limitations or the program is, what the incentives and consequences of not meeting it. And we think that transportation plan should be clear in the EIR in terms of what they're proposing and how it would be enforced. We're also finding issue with how they've discounted some of the traffic trips based on internal uses, and we're really just not seeing the relationship of those efficiencies and why those should be discounted. So we think the EIR should explain that in more detail. We're very concerned about the distribution of the traffic. They're suggesting that 5% of the office traffic, so this is a 400,000 square foot office building, and the other use is generating, by their estimates, which we think are low, about 7,000 trips a day. They're saying 10% or 5% of those trips are only using San Antonio through Los Altos. We think that's unrealistically low. And as well, they're suggesting that 10% of the non-office traffic is using San Antonio. And this is an especially sensitive issue for us because not only does this project impact the San Antonio and El Camino intersection level of service to the point where they're even noting it's a significant impact that cannot be mitigated, even though they're working with us to see what we can do to alleviate it a little bit. And we're looking at maybe adding a turn lane on the right or left-hand side of northbound San Antonio at that intersection. But still, it still won't mitigate that impact. But we think if we account for the trips that we think they're underestimating and distributing them more to San Antonio, which we think would be reasonable, it's just going to have a substantial effect on the San Antonio and First, San Antonio and Foothill, and Foothill and El Monte. These intersections work together as a system, and they're already impacted. And by their own calculations, it's very close to degrading a level of service. And it's 1 second delay from that threshold. And so it's clear to us that there will be an impact to those intersections. We're also concerned that they're not really talking about the effects of when it's a very congested area in general around the project, and with the commute patterns and the congestion inherent in those commute patterns, we're seeing that there might be some trip distributions on some of the other streets like Springer and Grant Road and Miramonte, some other ways as people find their way from Highway 280 to the site. And we think that they should be looking at that. We think that they should be responsible for a fair share of a traffic impact fee to help cover some of the issues that might need to be mitigated on our streets. And additionally, that their traffic study should include the San Antonio, Foothill, El Monte intersections together. And it just stops.
They don't even talk about, they sort of lump First Street and San Antonio together.
Right, they stop at that intersection,
Yeah.
which that intersection really is connected to those other two. And there's a greater issue there. And the county's already noted a problem with the throughput of Foothill there, and they're looking at ways to address that problem, and this is just going to make that worse. We didn't see that their transportation study analyzed the effects of pedestrians and cyclists, not only the patterns and how they might relate to our own pedestrian and bike facilities in the area, but also, as I alluded to earlier, the pedestrian and bike impacts to the intersection itself. As people are crossing the San Antonio-El Camino intersection, it just backs up the traffic there at that intersection. And it's particularly bad during the lunchtime when all the people are out walking around, going to the restaurants and so forth, which is why we're also suggesting this midday peak is something that should be studied. There's some inconsistencies in some of their tables. And then finally, and I already mentioned that the San Antonio First Street intersection is very close to, even with their calculations close to degrading to the level of service E, and would certainly do that if they distributed the trips the way we think they should be. So those are our comments, and I'll mention just as a matter of background, but it's not really a concern, we think, for the Planning and Transportation Commission. There is another element of this study that we're looking at. The part of the Mountain View sewer goes through Los Altos' sewer, and Los Altos, Mountain View, and Palo Alto have a joint sewer treatment plant, and there's a certain capacity to that. And this project is getting very close to some of the thresholds that we've established in sewer rights. And so we're looking at those and probably going to ask for a more comprehensive study of those impacts. And so we're working on that as an aside, and we'll, I think, present some concerns along those lines to the council. So with that concludes my report, and both of us are more than happy to answer your questions.
I just have
So, David, do you want us to give comments to this letter to then include to council? Is that the goal?
Yes, our goal is that if the commission has anything else or comments about our comments, we certainly would welcome those. But if you see anything else that you think we should be noting as a concern, that's really why we're here. We wanted to get your input as well and share that with council.
I just have
Start
a
with questions.
Yeah, I just have a question, and it's not related to the EIR that we are looking at. I know because of San Antonio and the corner, we are looking at this project. Do we know anything about the Google complex right before or right after the railway tracks, when that is coming through?
Oh, the old Mayfield site?
Yeah.
No, I'm not aware of. I've heard that they are buying that and planning to use it.
Actually, I think they're working on
It's
it.
done.
There
Yeah,
were-
I think that
500,000
it's,
square feet,
that's a huge complex. I know the Google,
possibly
They are-
1,500 employees.
yeah, but they are encouraging, that's why they took it right next to the train track, but still they will be, I'm just curious, will that come? Will they look at, because that's going to be an impact also, I'm just curious as to how that works. We'll probably never see that. Is that,
We may, if in their judgment, if we're an affected agency, we would be given a copy of the report to comment on.
That's Google who's moving in there?
it's a Google complex.
Okay.
It is something that we could certainly contact Mountain View and let them know we are interested
Okay.
and would like to be on a notification list.
But I'm just curious. I know they're trying to work where their employees are going to be carpooling and they're using the train, and they're pretty good at that. But I'm just curious. It's a huge complex which is going to be coming there, which is right after this one. So,
Yeah.
And presumably, there's some cumulative effect.
yeah, it has to be something, right? They'll start using the schools down here and Pinewood and everything. So it's okay.
And unfortunately, while there's a train stop, the train doesn't stop there very
They're
often.
apparently working on that,
Well,
on making it as an express stop.
that's a good trick.
Yeah.
I do have a question for David as well. David, and forgive the basic question, but I'm still trying to understand, the draft EIR talks about adding another lane to northbound left-hand turn on San Antonio. That's going from where to where? I'm still trying to visualize what they're fixing.
Maybe I should let Cedric answer
Okay.
that. I think I understand it, but I'm not sure.
So I think what they're trying to do is that approach has a certain, I think it was LOSF, that approach.
Which approach?
The northbound.
going from
the
where?
Northbound San Antonio,
So northbound is heading from here down to El Camino.
El Camino, right.
Yeah.
It gets hung
And-
up trying to make a left turn from San Antonio
And-
down to El Camino.
Left turn, but it gets hung up in part because there's a turn onto, trying to remember,
Loucks.
that's Loucks, and there's not enough width.
Originally, they weren't aware of. Originally, they interpreted that the left turn was the issue. They came and met with staff here, and we notified them actually the right turn was more of an issue for Los Altos, northbound right turn, because the queue for the left turn did not back up to the through lane. But there's enough space for the current left turn to be narrowed down and accommodate a different left lane. So at that time, we suggested they analyze the right turn instead. But the production of the AOR was already out there. So I think with our comment here, it just reinforces our right turn as the necessary movement.
Okay, because I know historically there was a lot of right turns on Sherwood
Yeah.
to eliminate
Yeah.
what was a painful intersection at San Antonio and El Camino, in part because the pedestrian traffic,
Yes.
right? People wanted to make the right turn, but there were so many pedestrians crossing, and that's, it's not bad that pedestrians are trying to cross, but it made it very difficult. So effectively, it created only one straight-through lane to continue north on San Antonio.
Yeah. We think the right turn better addresses the problems that we have.
Right, okay. All right. Thank you. I'm just,
Cedric, can you explain the process of calculating and then distributing a fair share traffic impact fee?
Impact fee?
Because it seems like we're suggesting that they need to increase it from our
So,
assumption, that it'll be 5% in Los Altos to 25%.
oh, trip distribution. So,
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand, the fair share traffic impact fee, what that
okay,
actually
so
means.
I can start with. Typically, what we'd do is we would take a baseline of the trips per leg of the intersection, what it is currently, and then we would overlay what the trips are of the project on top of that, and then you take the percentage of that over the existing would be the fair share for whatever approach is predominant through that intersection, whether it's through San Antonio, Sherwood, or if it's coming up Sherwood, making a left turn, whatever's predominant gets that fair share. So, for example, if
Where does that fee come from? When does it come into?
I prefer to, how do we
Right.
claim that?
What we're suggesting there is that this Los Altos, when we have a traffic impact fee that all projects have to pay based on their square footage, and that's to kind of defray traffic impacts at a more less specific level. But when we have a specific impact, such as the Los Altos Gardens project that was impacting the Sherwood-San Antonio intersection, what our approach is there is that in addition to the traffic impact fees, we calculate a fair share of the impact they're creating to that specific intersection and seek a contribution that relates to that fair share. So we're kind of combining those two ideas and saying, well, if you're going to be impacting the city's intersections, then you should pay a fair share
To the city.
to the city. And whether that's based on our traffic impact fee and then a percentage of that in terms of how it's affecting the intersection. But the way we calculate the basis.
What would we do with
number-
those funds, David?
Pardon me?
What would we do with those funds?
We would look at ways to mitigate traffic beyond what Mountain View is able to do in their own project.
So basically,
And-
staff time, looking at any studies that need to be done there, and then the actual work. Right.
Right.
That's
For
where the-
example, they're suggesting a mitigation here that we widen San Antonio northbound with a turn lane going left. We're saying, maybe it's turn lane right or something else. Look at that. And if that was a mitigation that Mountain View adopted as part of their project, then the developer would have to pay for those improvements
That's
to
my
that
question.
intersection
Who-
for us.
Who imposes it and at what stage? So if we want that, It's got to go in here.
It's an ask. They'd have to respond, legally, they have to respond to our comments in the final EIR. And so with a comment like that, I mean, they could embrace it, they could, relate to it, or they could respond that it's just really not appropriate, that if there is a specific impact, that should be quantified and mitigated and a direct sort of one-to-one thing. And that, they may not be responsible for the fee structure that we would impose on our own projects. They have their own system. So ultimately, they're going to comment on it, and then as the project goes through the process, it could be identified as a mitigation. And we would follow along and probably suggest to Mountain View that they include something like that, if it makes sense at that point, depending on the final analysis. And then, ultimately be up to the Mountain View Council whether something like that was adopted.
So it's just a suggestion from our side, and then see how they respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a suggestion that we put to their draft, which maybe they respond to and somehow has to
Or if they even
rise to the
decide to
level
pick it up.
of the council.
Right, or they can simply
Ignore it.
ignore us, which is...
What is the best case scenario of a letter of concern like this one? Because it seems like we're saying, we're concerned about the distribution of traffic and they're discounting trips. Does that mean we just want them not to discount the trips? Or is the ask really this fair share of the traffic impact fee?
Well, on the transportation side, I want to know what the real distribution is. I want to see if it's actually 10% instead of 5%. And I can imagine using Los Altos Avenue as a cut-through. I want to know these things to make a decision. So that's part of the reason why we create this. The other part of it is, making sure we get our fair share to improve our roads to accommodate the new traffic now, because we know it's going to come through our city.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the question is that's our ask. Just like the fair share, would they actually do the traffic analysis like you're requesting? Or would that be also something which they might just,
They'll have to explain.
why
Why?
they might ignore it?
And so-
Why they ignored it?
There may
That's
be a
what we want.
reason why they're not.
So, I don't know if it's appropriate to comment, but if the chair
Yeah,
doesn't
why don't
mind,
we
from my
jump into
point of
comments?
view, the ask should not be money to fix the problem. The ask ultimately should be for them to not create a traffic problem in Los Altos. And I think that comes from a different approach, which says you're going to find ways to reduce the number of of peak and non-peak trips to the site through ride sharing, through public transportation, through off-site parking, because getting money to widen San Antonio Road or Los Altos Avenue, I'm not sure is a feasible option. And even if it were, I think it has a dramatic negative impact on the quality of life in Los Altos. So from my point of view, I would like that the message clearly is we don't believe the numbers. You will be much kinder than I will, but, some of these numbers are fantasy land. They make, the traffic disappear and magically none of it shows up in Los Altos, and that doesn't reflect reality. But more importantly than that, to really say, how are we going to not fix it after the fact, but address it as an integral part of the project? And, I think there are some specifics which we can give them, but that's at least my take on what I'd like to see done. And it's not to kill the project, but to make sure that the solution is baked into the project as opposed to making us pick up the pieces as a community after the fact, because frankly, no amount of money really fixes the problem for the residents of Los Altos in terms of quality of life.
So I have a question, John. I mean, are you suggesting that they actually, I mean, we know that if that project is going to happen in one form or the other, we also know that it's going to impact regardless what we do, right? I mean, no matter what they say, even if they say, yes, you know, we are working on it, at it and people are not going to be cutting through, we are doing carpooling or whatever, we know it's going to still impact. So are you suggesting more that we know the impact is coming, so rather than waiting to fix it, we actually come up with the strategy of putting in whatever lanes and doing whatever is needed?
No, it's more, it starts more at the project end. So as an example, David and I had a conversation earlier today. Packard Foundation essentially reduced by 60% their parking demand because they have a corporate culture of ride-sharing and public transportation. I'm not suggesting that a traditional private employer could achieve 60%, but at least that sets the sort of the bar as to what is achievable. But you know, they're talking about a 30% reduction in trips through non-specified elements, but they haven't reduced the amount of parking. Reduce the amount of parking by 30 or 40%, and by definition, they have to figure out a way, because there's not going to be places for people to park. That's baking the solution into the project.
Or does it create
A bigger problem for the
massive
neighbors.
seismic project if they don't come up with a solution because they're out? Once it's built, they're out. And then we've reduced parking to a point of
We can't reduce.
collapse.
We can't reduce parking. I mean, and I'm
Only
looking
remedy
at
is
staff.
to fine them.
But
Legally,
if
you can't.
If you bake it in, you know, if they say they're going to use public transportation and you know, part of the project benefit here is being on the El Camino corridor, then let's see some consequences behind what they're saying they're doing.
But John, give me an example. For example, if we have a project downtown, and if somebody is suggesting we can reduce it by 30%, and we say, okay, even though we know that as per square foot office space you need X amount of parking, we're going to actually ask you not to provide that parking because you have to have people. How can we do that?
We did that in the case of Packard Foundation. Packard Foundation said, we are going to.
Yeah, but that is one foundation, right? Here there'll be multiple offices. And I'm looking at staff because I don't know Mountain View or any city would give up on they have to be fully parked, right? Or no?
Actually, they are, in a way, they are reducing their parking a little bit. For example, under Mountain View's code, they would be required to have about 2,740 parking spaces, and they're providing about 2,600. So they're sort of short about 144 spaces.
And what's the reasoning they're giving?
But under their reduced demand analysis, they're providing 2,600 spaces. Under their reduced demand, they think they're only going to need 2,347 spaces. So, in their analysis,
Surplus.
they're less than what Mountain View would require if it was just a straightforward project, but they're 250 over what they think their demand is going to be. So
7,000 trips, 2,000.
so they're sort of playing the middle on that, but
So if you look at somebody like Apple, they put in shuttle service, they put in things. If the goal is to reduce the impact in Los Altos, in my opinion, you got to bake it into the project, because otherwise, there is nothing that's going to stop those numbers from, and the traffic from impacting Los Altos. And I don't see, I mean, what are we going to do? We're going to make San Antonio Road a 6-lane highway. We're going to make Los Altos Avenue a 4-lane road. You know, I don't think any of those are economically or politically feasible solutions in our community. And so, you know, this between this project and the Google campus, you know, who's going to have the most impact? I think it's going to be the community of Los Altos, because it's people, you know, getting from 280, going to 101, going across, back and forth. And, you know, nobody seems to be fixing 85. So,
Oh, yeah.
So one thing that I think would be interesting to maybe try to compel is that they do have some connection to public transit, like a shuttle service to the train that just they're responsible for, maybe to get people to.
I agree with everything John is saying. My only concern is that if you look at the demographic of whoever is going to be in there, you're looking at Packard Foundation or Googleplex. They have their employees, they have an employee culture, and they have standards of employees who are okay taking the shuttles, who are okay going in the. But if these are going to be small individual companies coming in, 50% are executives who are going to be just driving there. No matter what they do, they're going to just drive there. So I'm just thinking more realistically. We do have that impact. We can do what you're suggesting. I don't know how much they'll actually even listen to that, versus they might pay something so that we can actually have the funds to do something on our end if needed.
yeah.
That's, I don't know.
I would, again, my bias is bake it into the project. I mean, if they gave us, you know, $5 million, $10 million, you know, does that, what does that do to our roads and the quality of life in Los Altos?
Yeah.
I don't think it's not a money issue. You know, it's the ability for, you know, our community, you know, we're talking about building a community center right across from downtown, and we're, you know, already lamenting that it's hard to get across San Antonio Road. And, you know, I can tell you that, you know, when I moved here 15 years ago, I could get out of my street and take a left turn because there were breaks in traffic. You know,
And now there's
now
no break.
there's never a break in traffic, and it's only going to get worse. So for me, it's not about widening the roads. It's about finding and forcing, and, you know, if a project only has so much parking, then, you know, with the rental agreements comes a stipulation, you know, you're entitled to this many parking spots. And when the parking spots are gone, the parking spots are gone. So, you know, reducing parking can be effective. It means that, you know, the tenants are going to have to make some choices. But, you know,
So my question is this something, it has to be one or the other, or
Do both.
do both? Demand,
Bake
yeah.
it, cook it into the.
I mean, we are
at the front
making a
end.
suggestion to the council, right?
Demand a higher proportion of this traffic impact fee because we know
It's going to
to
happen.
affect us. And if we don't believe these numbers. We think they're grossly underestimating the impact on us. So why would we trust that when they say we're going to do all these things, that they're actually going to do it?
No, and
Let's
even if they did it
also-
in good faith, somebody else down the road
Let's also
might
put in
decide
place
not to do it.
the request that we expect will be impacted to a much greater degree. And for that
Yeah,
reason
because then they're
deserve a
going to say,
higher
well, you know, now we are
proportion.
putting less parking, and our numbers are working.
Right.
You're not going to get any impact, so there is no compensation on that side. Versus they do have the land where they can come in and put more parking whenever they want if they decide to do that.
One other comment related to the numbers that they came up with was that I noted that these traffic counts were done in August 2013 when school was not in session. And I think, clearly levels of service would be lower when the school commute is included. And you just feel it in this last week when there was no school on Monday.
Yep.
It was a breeze.
And now
And-
there'll be no school next
So they
week.
didn't account for any of that, and I think we should highlight that. And
Right. And I think it goes beyond that, too, because they didn't look at the traffic impacts to the high school. They talk about there's going to be no impact to the schools, and if you look at the school enrollment task force, in fact, all the schools are maxing out in terms of capacity, and if you say, well, there's room at Covington, there was no analysis of the Covington-El Monte intersection, which is a highly impacted intersection, particularly in the mornings. So,
Are you talking about the phase one of the project? The residential?
no, I'm talking about, if you've got all these cars, you're going, I mean, it's.
Oh, you're impacting the existing problem
Right,
we have
right,
with the, okay, I see.
right. So,
Because I agree, because we do have on San Antonio, we have Egan and Bullis Charter at the corner. Then we have the high school, which everything filters onto the street. And I know something which I honestly didn't know, even though I'm living right across the school for the longest time. But I just can't believe that we are so green and we are yet so ungreen in the city. In Bullis Charter, because of their capacity issue, I didn't know till my nieces and nephews started going there that every month or every 2 months, half the class, like 5th grade, has to commute to Blocks or on Grant Avenue, the school. So the parents are coming to drop their kids who are in the younger grades here, then they run off to drop them, then they come back to pick the other ones at 2:30, then they run to get them, and then they bring them back for the after-school classes. And I don't think that's like even anybody knows what's happening, but that's where another congestion is in the morning. Every month they have 2 grades commuting, and it's just madness. I mean, I don't know why they didn't come up with a shuttle system where they can take their own kids in one shuttle rather than so many cars running in every direction. And all those things are happening right at San Antonio. Our traffic signals are like just sitting there, and it's only like that 1 hour, but 1 hour in the morning and then in the afternoon is huge.
any other thoughts?
I have more specific comments. So there was an assumption made in this document that most of the new employees, 2,500 employees for this project in general, were going to be local. And
Define local.
well, define local, and
From
I
Santa Clara
I don't
onwards.
believe that they are local, because I think, given the employment situation locally, you're going to have to draw people from somewhere, and that means people, and the question is where, and what roads are being used, and what means of transportation.
So they were assuming 20%, you said? 20%, you said?
No, I'm just saying 2,500, they're estimating 2,500 new employees for this, who will be working in this project eventually, retail stores and restaurants and things like that. And they said they expected them to be local. And that was sort of a throwaway and not necessarily believable. So I think a more detailed analysis of exactly where are people going to come from and what are the commute patterns and things like that is warranted.
And And I think I agree with you that it should be the worst case. In the report, and I know staff mentioned in a couple of places, they've taken the best case. We should be looking at the worst case situation.
So, David, you've already noted El Camino and El Monte, I believe, and El Camino and El Monte and Foothill, as well as San Antonio and Foothill as places where they have not done an analysis. The other thing is the document references that they were going to restrict the employee parking lot to employees only. And it seems to me that under the scenario of reducing demand for employee parking, what they need to do is reduce the amount of parking available to employees and, in fact, restrict the parking to the commercial and restaurant areas strictly for commercial and restaurant patrons and employees. And, and that needs to be done through some sort of traffic parking management system where, there's a token to get in or to get out or something, so that the parking, which is really for the cinema, for the restaurants, for the retail establishments, is restricted for
Their
those.
use.
So that would be the second part of baking the solution into the project to begin with. And lastly, I'd love to see, a more fleshed out alternate transportation plan with real specifics about Caltrain commitment to stopping at the San Antonio station, to the developer running shuttle buses, to Mountain View and light rail, to, frankly, what I would really like to see is finding parking areas, off-site parking areas near the intersection of 101 and 85 and 280 and 85 for employee parking, and run shuttle buses from there. So again, we don't have the traffic along San Antonio Road. And there may be some combination of all of those that can be done. My 2 cents worth.
Anyone else have any other suggestions? Thoughts?
First of all, I thought the staff report was excellent, and it's a good job, David. So, secondly, I found the whole EIR, and in particular this traffic thing, to be very depressing in the sense that it basically is a document to justify what they're doing. It's not. They have said essentially there are going to be substantial impacts and they're unavoidable. That's they're saying this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and we're throwing up our hands because it's unavoidable. And I think the idea of if they were forward thinking and they wanted to really try to mitigate some of this and work with the community, I think they would be willing to listen to some of these suggestions. My thinking is, though, that doing things like having them restrict parking, pay more in fees, and so forth I think it's a pipe dream on our part. I mean, we can certainly suggest that to them, but I just can't see the developer. The economic impact of this is so strong and positive for Mountain View that basically I think they could care less. And what I think we ought to do, in addition to, I like the suggestion, by the way, I know Stanford does this, is they do have employees park down by 101 and 280, and then they run them by shuttle buses. And that does work, and Stanford does do that for exactly the same reason, because Stanford has a huge number of employees, and going through the middle of Palo Alto at commute times is bad news. But I think we need to plan ourselves, and I think Cedric may be the key to this, in the sense that I think Los Altos should start now and look at what might need to happen to the San Antonio-El Camino intersection, what might need to happen to the expressway San Antonio-El Monte intersections, because as David points out, that's all one, as part of one system. And I think we're going to have a massive impact from this. I think it's unavoidable. I'm really discouraged about the possibility of the developers even lifting a finger to mitigate any of this. I just don't see it happening. They're not. I mean, this isn't Portland or Seattle or a European city where public transportation and thinking about the impacts of this kind of stuff goes along with the development. Let's just build a really big project and put in thousands and thousands of square feet, and then just move on to the next project. And the people who are left behind are going to have to deal with it. So I think if Cedric has any thoughts about the Los Altos Avenue El Camino intersection, the San Antonio El Camino intersection, the El Monte El Camino intersection, where something that an enhanced number of lanes or the way the signals are operated, something that could be done to mitigate. We should at least plan for that. I think in parallel with that, we certainly should suggest various ideas about employee parking and using more realistic numbers and having the project pay more realistic fees as far as traffic impacts are concerned. I just don't think that's really going to happen.
I agree with you. I mean, I think that,
I'm going to go home and slip my wrist now.
I mean, I think the reason I'm so fixated on getting a larger, or pushing for a larger portion of the fees, is because those solutions are going to cost us a lot of money.
Right. And that's why I think...
We will have to do them.
Right. I think having our staff, meaning Cedric probably, thinking about what it will take to do some of this, if it's even possible. But maybe he can say, yeah, if we coordinated all the signals and we, had a computerized traffic system at San Antonio and El Camino, maybe we could mitigate some. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea what the
Make a
technology...
tunnel expressway under San Antonio.
I'm sorry?
Make a tunnel expressway under San Antonio.
Yes, that's right.
But again, you realize at some point we do get to the capacity of roads.
Correct.
Right? I mean, you can,
Hey, I grew up in L.A. Don't start.
well, you just build more roads.
Yeah,
and
that's right. The
traffic
Los
problem
Angeles
gets
solution is
solved.
build more freeways.
Right.
So I think we should be prepared. We should try to understand if we even have a chance to improve the system. Maybe we don't. You might be right. We may already be there. I don't know if the Mountain View Council or the Mountain View planning people will take our council's suggestions seriously. I mean, David, maybe you have some experience with that. You did point out that legally they're required to at least
Respond.
address the concerns.
Yeah, they're required to comment on it in the IR, whether they adopt mitigations. It's whatever they feel is appropriate. So our approach is we at least need to ask, because if we don't ask, we're surely not going to get.
Of course.
So
I agree.
We're getting it all out on the table. However, realistic or not, these things might be. And, it may be more of a political effort. And that's why,
Right.
we're taking this up.
Going
to
to council,
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, it strikes me that if we're going to have any kind of impact, it's going to have to be a council-to-council kind of thing. That we can make suggestions and review documents and so forth, but we're not going to have any direct impact on this because it's too big an economic plum for the city of Mountain View, and they're just not going to wave it off because some people in Los Altos are upset about traffic. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Did you guys know that they actually had the high schoolers attend some of those planning meetings? They did, because the high schoolers are very excited that there is a cinema coming down the street. So they targeted the student population, which is, to be very honest, very creative way for them to get a lot of bodies for support. And, that's what they did. But, I mean, I have to agree with both of you. I think we should ask. It could be, I think we should ask both things. If you think so strongly about reducing parking, that's fine. But I think the ask that we are doing, where we want to see that 25% on our streets should be done regardless they reduce the parking or not. Just so on our side, Cedric could be ready to see how it will affect, because it's going to affect. And regardless what we say, development is going to happen. I mean, no matter what we say, they're going to build it.
I wouldn't-
So
yeah.
it is just good to have maybe both things in there, but it'll be just good to have what I was saying earlier, and that's what Laurel was saying, that we just get the cost at least, because after that, there's going to be a lot of impact on our staff and on our traffic studies to actually try and fix what's going to be happening on this end.
And this is not the only project. Right across the street, the old Firestone building is going to be redeveloped.
All that street is going to be
Yeah,
really it's dying.
what the old Safeway site, unclear what's going to happen there. We know what's happening to the old HP site. So the intensification
It's gonna just
along
increase.
San Antonio Road, right in one place, is sort of a perfect storm.
Yeah, they should give it to the school district.
And
They should give it to the school district and be done with it. Here it is.
I have to say, I was amused reading the EIR that they devoted a fair amount of space talking to whether or not it was really valuable to save the original building of the Shockley Transistor Company.
The plumbing supply.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Historic.
and they're going to put a plaque that says this is the birthplace of Silicon Valley. It just, among all the things that are going to happen from this project, saving the birthplace of Silicon Valley as the Shockley Semiconductor Company is
It's
fairly low-
marketing.
fairly low on my list. This is supposed to be an EIR, presumably.
It's
I mean,
marketing.
what they're using it as a whitewashing justification to do the project because they're required to do it. It should be a serious study of what
Third
are
party.
what are the impacts. And to me, it was just a complete whitewash. It was
Right.
just terrible.
It should have been a
Whoever was
third
asked to
party
do the
check.
project was given a lot of constraints in terms of, what they were asked to analyze.
Yeah.
Get the answer you want if you ask the right question.
Exactly. John, I agree with all of the suggestions you made, but not the reduction of parking. I mean, and I don't think that's a viable, realistic
Well, they wouldn't do it anyway, but
solution.
Oh, I understand they're not going to do it.
I don't think
but
they
it-
should do it.
Well, but
Not saying that they're
it
not.
it forces them to think creatively about where the cars go. As Ken said, you have Stanford University, which, has found a way to do off-site parking to address
Yeah,
the
but they-
impact.
but they
I'd
don't
rather they
reduce parking
also
at
do that,
Stanford.
not in place of it.
And I think that's something we can expect and can probably, even they can enforce something like if the Googleplex is coming or whatever is happening. This is one company and they can do it. But if it's a development like this, I really doubt
Right.
that they'll even try.
But you see.
Because then they are limiting the leasing opportunities on their
Right.
project.
But I wouldn't be surprised if, in fact, they leased out, one building to a single tenant and another building to a single tenant, or both buildings to a single tenant. I don't see where that's, given what's going on in the valley with the large companies in particular, that's not an unlikely scenario. And so you have to ask the question, so if Google were to take both those buildings, wouldn't you want to have baked in a reduction in parking and serious stuff to make sure that there was a reduction? Or if Apple had a development facility there, or VMware, SAP, pick any of the large companies in the area. Facebook, decides they're going to Box is going public. Are they going
Right
to?
here.
Well, they're in
Right.
their small office. Are they going to stay in that small office, or are they going to move to a larger 88-foot tower in Mountain View? I don't know. So,
All the points you bring up are all really good, and they all really allude to number 2 on the discussion here regarding TDM. In this doc, we note here that we don't really know how they're going to enforce it, how they're going to collect the data. That's traditionally one of the biggest issues for an agency to evaluate how well they're doing the TDM, because they could just be fabricating the data. We don't know.
Right.
So with reduced parking, that effectively bumps up to 30%, to a different number now. So without even knowing how they're going to enforce it, we need to understand that first before we can logically ask, okay, we think with your strategy of managing traffic, we think you can go to 40%. But at this point, we don't know that yet. And that's one of our asks here.
Is it worth highlighting the projects in the pipeline on San Antonio, like the Google complex, which maybe we need to do a little research to determine where it is in the process, and highlight the cumulative effect that these massive projects combined will have?
it's a really good point, because the IR really doesn't address the fact that, in addition to this building,
What's
there's
happening?
another
More is coming.
500,000 or 1 million square feet of office that's going to go up, hundreds of residential towers that are all going to be going up. And, the fantasy that the people who work are going to live in the same complex is a very passé
Right.
concept.
And I also don't like the idea of, trying to put the burden and costs on the last person who builds and sends everything to F, as opposed to all the people that led up to that. If they each were sharing in the costs, then it makes more sense to me.
But what kind of, what suggestions do we give to council? Like,
That we
we've been
reference them
discussing.
in this letter of concern.
So,
Maybe an exercise
should
in
we
futility.
make it as a,
So I think referencing the fact that, we have a significant number of residential complexes that are coming on stream in the near future, for which there are going to be impacts on San Antonio in particular. Specifically, if you look at the old Palo Alto bowling site, that's a residential complex. It's within the Los Altos School District. You're going to have increased traffic headed to Covington, Santa Rita, Egan, and Los Altos High School. You look at the new project where the old Los Altos Garden Supply is, ditto for that project in terms of the traffic on San Antonio, on El Camino. You look at the Firestone project, which I believe is going to be residential, David, is that correct?
I think so.
And that's going also within the Los Altos School District. You look at, I don't know if there's been a revised plan for the old Safeway site. So if you look at all
and
those.
these are all happening right now. And I agree with you, there are still projects which are across the street on San Antonio, which should be mushrooming in the next few years, which is going to be a further impact on.
It's going to be a further impact, but they're already enough, either they're in construction and are coming on stream, or they will come on stream. So again, the traffic impacts are, and the level of service impacts are seriously understated. Because, what's being built at Palo Alto Bowl hasn't yet impacted San Antonio Road and Portola. It will. It will, because, in that project, there are 500 apartments, minimum, there'll be 10% going to public schools.
I had given the suggestion of just closing San Antonio at the end of El Camino, but nobody was listening.
I sort of like that
close
idea,
Put
to
a
make
nice
it a
sign of Los
pedestrian.
Altos, and we're done.
Actually, I think David's idea was the best. We should make San Antonio a toll road.
I think a toll road would
Only
be
for
a really,
residents is zero.
That's right.
From Los Altos.
I think a toll road would
Fast
be
track.
would be a great idea.
Why can't we do that?
Can we do it, David?
No, I'm serious.
I-
Like a fast track thing.
Yeah.
For the
I-
residents, it's free, and anybody else, it's tring, tring, tring.
All right, you elitists.
All right.
David, what do we have
Having
to
fun
do
with it.
to conclude this?
Well, I think there's some common themes in these comments that we can coalesce. There's one point that I think I didn't see agreement on, and so maybe it's worth. And it was with regard to reducing the parking, and my sense is that wasn't consensus, but maybe was a majority of the commission. And if everything we've heard tonight is a majority of the commission, then we can include those, all of those comments in our letter.
I just am not comfortable.
Let's poll each of us on what our thoughts on that. I mean, I said what my thought was. John, you know what his thought is.
I mean, I think that's a very, it's a great suggestion. I just feel like it's not a practical one. I'm just torn that if we reduce anything, they'll have no control who's coming in. And it's not just us who's getting affected. What happens to the neighborhoods around that property if they don't have parking, and how I just am not comfortable reducing parking when it's needed compared to their horrible parking layout at Safeway. I
Right.
mean, they've squeezed everybody in there.
But you understand, we know that they're not going to reduce the parking, but by putting that in, that forces them to rethink what they do in terms of traffic management. I think it's a useful thing because it becomes a forcing function. It's not simply give us your traffic management plan, it's reduce your parking. And we know it's not going to happen. They're not going to do it. But I view it as a forcing function to put some real teeth into a real management plan around public transportation.
But then my issue is that I think the one which is more realistic, that we do need them to do that 25% distribution and give us those numbers. They're going to come back and say, well, you asked us to reduce it, we've done it, there is no impact, we're not, we've already had no impact, and there is no need to do any of the further studies because we've just reduced the parking, even though we know.
But David, we can count it afterwards, can't we?
Ken, where do you fall on this? If we're polling,
I understand what John is saying, and I remember growing up in Los Angeles, one of the solutions was don't build any more freeways because that'll keep the people from expanding. In my mind, that kind of restriction just doesn't work. That's trying to manage social behavior by restricting access to facilities, and it just doesn't. It's a non-starter for me. So
Okay.
I would not vote to ask them to reduce the parking.
okay.
It's up to you now.
So
You have two.
it
What's-
sounds like there is a majority, but it's saying the opposite.
Yeah, so it seems like everything we've heard tonight is the will of the council or commission accept the idea of reducing parking.
Yeah.
And we certainly,
And actually, we're not a
discussion
majority,
be
three.
reflected in the minutes.
Right. So I would like the minority perspective to be included and recognize the fact that it was,
We didn't have a majority.
well, yeah, I mean, and.
3-1.
Yeah, it's 3-1, and we're down
We are
a lot of
missing-
people, and I'm not making any judgment on the 3-1, but I at least
I agree.
give the council something to chew on.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
And in terms of their responsibilities to respond to these comments in the final EIR, and then we can, depending on their response, generate another response, and then that would go, back to the city of Mountain View. And whether we thought their response was appropriate or the mitigations were appropriate.
But David, is it your sense that the Los Altos Council has elevated this to a level of concern, or is this not on their radar?
I really don't know. We've met with their staff, and their staff's very, eager to
No, I'm talking about
try
the
and
Los
resolve.
Altos Council.
Our own
Well, I think the
council.
Los Altos Council's concerned. I mean, just their acknowledgement of this process we've created here, I think,
Okay.
tells me that they are,
Okay.
more concerned than.
Because I think the only way we're going to get any kind of cooperation whatsoever with either the project or the city of Mountain View is for it to be done at the council-to-council
I
level.
agree with you on that.
I mean, they're going to have to go down there and talk to them and say, look, guys, this is not going to work for us.
And we'll, and I'll make sure, it's very clear. It's probably not a good a comment that would go into the.
Correct.
the
I
document,
wasn't
but think
suggesting that.
To our council.
Right.
I think that would be I'm certainly hearing that recommendation.
Right.
from the
Yeah.
commission.
Okay. I think that concludes
So-
our, no?
I'm just wondering, David, because this is recorded, you're going to extract the comments out of the recording?
Yes, what I'm going to do is prepare the minutes quickly, and since we will have a meeting before council meets, so we can go over those minutes and approve those. But I think what I'll do, because we're just moving quickly, we're going to report to council earlier than we need to for that meeting. What I'll do is circulate the minutes, early next week to the commission, the whole commission, and make sure that those that weren't present, if they had some comments, that those would be added as outside of this process, but certainly input
Okay.
to council.
I think it would be useful to get the other people from the Planning Commission to weigh in on additional comments or any input they have to any of the things we talked about, plus or minus.
We could listen
Definitely.
to
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
One of the things I just wanted to add is, we're aware of the County Roads and Airports Division is reviewing this document as well. They're concerned about Foothill. I mean, they've got their own interests there. So I think, we're going to be aligned with some other agencies' concerns.
Well,
as we
everybody that wrote them a letter was concerned about it. City of Palo Alto wrote them a letter, and they were concerned about it.
Yeah.
The county wrote them a letter, they were concerned about
Yeah,
it.
but this is Mountain View.
Yeah.
I'm just saying
So-
that everyone who's looked at this EIR is concerned about it.
Okay.
David, is there any restriction on our side as commissioners to discuss any of this with any of the City of Mountain View council members?
As residents, I mean, certainly as a resident, you can communicate as you see fit, of course. But as a, as a commission message, will be through the minutes and our summary. But certainly, I mean, Los Altos residents could go to the Mountain View meetings and attend.
So I had the privilege of going to a Mountain View City Council meeting when they were looking at the project at the old pumpkin farm. And I've never seen a group of elected officials more arrogant and dismissive of comments from residents of Los Altos. It was pretty appalling, their behavior. Their view was, we're Mountain View, we can do what we want, and by the way, Los Altos, why don't you widen Grant Road, because you're the problem. I mean, it was...
And the reason, I haven't been to a council meeting in Mountain View, so I don't know all the council members, but I know one of them personally, and him being a former mayor, I don't think, I've never seen him, he's been way more approachable than anybody else. So I was just curious to see where we stand as a body, if that means we can approach them as a neighbor. And this is public information, right?
Certainly.
Just curious to see what their take is.
I would try everything.
I just want to know what their take is on it. It'll be just
As Ken says, the compelling economics for Mountain View
Of course.
are overwhelming, and I think they're going to find a way to approve this and minimize the hurt to the developer, because it's pure economic interest on their part.
And I don't blame them as a city. If they want to grab it when the economy is high, they've zoned it for that. Until we fight with them to rezone that road, we'll see these problems arise every time they develop on that street. Okay.
I think this closes the discussion.
Thank
Unless
you.
have
Thank you
more-
very much for your comments. We really appreciate it.
We have other items, right?
That's the end of the first
Any
lesson.
commissioner reports?
No, it was Jerry last time. I don't know who he managed to sub for, so I don't
Yeah, I don't know.
have no idea.
So
Potential future agenda
So,
items?
well, this was in the town crier, so I'll mention it just in passing. The city council approved a plan to allow developers to redevelop the parking plazas with a restriction on maintaining the 9-foot wide width, replanting mature trees, undergrounding utilities, and the estimate cost per parking space for that effort is somewhere around $110,000 per parking space. So they've directed staff to come up with a plan. It remains to be seen if any developer would actually do that, given the high cost. Because above-ground parking is $30,000 a spot, and below-ground parking is about $80,000 to $100,000 a spot. So it's, to say the least, a very expensive venture.
How is it so disproportionate in other costs? How is that cost so disproportionately high when you look at what other towns are building?
Because you're taking the existing plazas and you have to, there are a lot of utilities to underground.
There's a lot of, you can't just take one spot and restripe it.
Right, you can't. You have to, and
It's a chain
you've got a lot of
reaction.
mature trees, so you're tearing up mature trees and replanting new
Curbs and
mature
stuff.
trees. So they've apparently, the council has put the bar very high for a developer to do it, but they have at least opened that door. So I thought that was interesting, and apparently it's going to come to the Planning Commission at some point for review before the council adopts the final ordinance. So,
Or it would be a policy.
oh, policy.
We'll be coming back to them with the policy and.
Okay, sorry.
And we may have some issues with achieving certain aspects of it or not, and just flesh it out how we think it could work, and then
Right.
we'll see.
And on average, it's a 10%, it's no more than 10% increase in parking in any one parking lot, if I remember the numbers correctly. So a 75 car lot, you could get maybe 7 additional spots out of that effort.
That'll help.
I guess.
Okay. Anything else? All right, when we
Then we are adjourned.